Hi, welcome to another batch of classic bookmarks. A couple of years ago, we realized that we had been producing Bookmark for 30 years, some 425 episodes. To celebrate, we chose 15 shows to enhance and broadcast. The reception has been terrific. Viewers got a real kick out of seeing or re-seeing the conversations with Toni Morrison, Ray Bradbury, William Styron, Alexander McCall Smith, and many others. So, we have chosen another 15 shows from the archives. Interviews with George Saunders, Margaret Atwood, E.O. Wilson, Walter Mosley, Albert Murray, James Haskins, and 9 others. Of course, we are continuing to produce new shows with new writers and old writer friends. But in the meantime, we hope you enjoy watching these classics as much as we enjoyed making them. E.O. Wilson is now a Harvard professor and world-renowned biologist with 2 Pulitzer Prizes. But his roots are in South Alabama, and his bachelor's degree is from the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. I spoke with Dr. Wilson in Monroeville, the literary capital of Alabama. Dr. Wilson, what a pleasure. It's very kind of you to come back to Alabama, come to the conference, and be willing to sit down and talk for a while about your work.
Well, it's coming home for me. I speak of myself not as a New Englander or Harvard professor who was born and raised in Alabama. I speak of myself as an Alabamian who went up north to work.
What kind of Alabamian are you? South? Are you from the southern part of the state, along the coast?
I lived in several parts of Alabama, including Decatur in the north, but my roots and most of my childhood were spent in the south. Mobile, Bruton.
You were a child biologist, a child naturalist in the swamps,
Yeah.
seacoast?
That's right. I got an early taste of the beautiful environments of Alabama, including especially South Alabama, and it was transformative for me. I guess a more modest way of putting it, as I should putting it, is that every kid has a bug period, and I just never grew out of mine. I just kept going out and catching bugs and then snakes.
After several high schools, considerable moving around, where did you choose to go to college?
Of course, I went to the University of Alabama.
I knew that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then?
After taking 2 degrees there, I went up to the University of Tennessee to begin work on my doctoral because there was a specialist on ants there, and that's what I decided I was going to work on, was the biology of ants. I never thought I would leave the South. I just thought I would graduate, just come back probably to Alabama and settle. But I had a chance to go to Harvard. I was invited to come up there, and they have a magnificent collection of ants and other organisms. So I went up there to take my PhD, and that's where I stayed, actually. I was then offered a professorship and stayed.
And one way and another, allowing for field work, you've been there 40 years or more.
More. In fact, including my student years, I have been there for 49 years. I taught for 41 years at Harvard.
What is the record? Who's the man who's been there the longest?
I'm in the top 10%, I'm sure. I don't know who holds the record, but I had no intention of breaking it. I voluntarily retired at 69 so that I could spend all my time in research and writing and visiting Alabama.
And you do visit 2 or 3 times a year, I'm sure.
Well, as often as I can, yeah. And there are many reasons to visit it, both sentimental but also scientific. I have a lot of projects that involve Alabama.
From your books I've learned, and from hearing you speak on different occasions over the years, Alabama has the most fresh water of any state, and the most biodiversity. Is that right? I mean, is that literally the case?
That is. Alabama, I've been urging on its leaders and promoters, could be known as the aquatic state. It's rich in water, of course, but it's also very rich in the variety of life, of its fauna and flora, and most notably the aquatic. It has something in the vicinity of, not sure the exact figure, but it's somewhere between 325 and 350 kinds of fish in the freshwater alone. And that's the record. Our only competitor is Tennessee, which has a comparable number, but I'm told that Alabama has slightly the edge in its enormous variety of fish. But that goes too for other kinds of creatures, for plants, enormous diversity of plants, and for many kinds of animals, insects, and the like. In fact, for the last 3 days, while I've been in the vicinity of Monroeville, I've taken the opportunity to conduct field work in some of the fabulous habitats along the Tombigbee River, the Claiborne ravines and elsewhere, where we still, in spite of all we've done to the state, cutting down most of the trees and plowing it under and so on, there are still beautiful spots that contain the original Alabama.
In your work, there's always this peak of excitement when you find something, an ant no one has ever seen before, or something like that. Did you find anything?
This time around, no. We got a lot of interesting things, and we saw a lot of very rare plants too, which abound in this region, in the ravines and in a strange formation not far from Monroeville here, called Salt Mountain.
I don't know a thing about it.
Very few people do. It's a hill of only a few hundred feet, densely forested, and with a lot of peculiar plants on it. And so we had a special trip there and went over it and around it and explored.
Yeah. Many times in your work you talk about how the only forests left often are on the steepest, highest, craggiest hills, because that's the only place people won't cut them down and farm.
Unfortunately, that's true, and it's very true in Alabama. This morning, for example, I was on the Claiborne ravines on the Tombigbee, and I spent the whole morning on a 45-degree incline. I kid you not. Just working exactly, working to keep myself from sliding off and then down into the bottom of the ravine, while I collected and studied ants along the ravine. But fortunately, there are ravines, and there are a few other places besides ravines where original Alabama, wild Alabama, is still can be seen, and we can hold on to it.
Can we? Should? How can we?
We should.
Of course.
And Alabama has not had a distinguished history in conservation up to this point. We have some superb reserves, or the beginnings of reserves, the Bankhead National Forest, for example, the bluffs and ravines along the Mobile and Tensas River. But the one that I like to point to, that I focused on a lot and helped develop the study of in terms of its natural history, and that's the Mobile-Tensas Delta. Many people in Alabama and beyond are probably unaware that this is a wilderness area. It's rather similar to the Everglades, 300 square miles of it that is almost impenetrable, but a wonderland of natural history.
From years and years of work with ants, and especially, if I understand this right, how they communicate, you managed to move along towards what would become finally sociobiology.
That's right.
For people who they aren't going to glaze over. There'll be no glazing. But define now, as time has passed and the issues are, and this has cooled some, but what is sociobiology? And if you want to just go right ahead, why are people saying those terrible things about it?
Well, it wasn't just about ants, or it didn't come just from ants, but in the 70s, I undertook a complete study, mostly from the literature, my own experience though, and the social insects, ants, bees, wasps, termites, and brought together all that we knew about them. And then I put it on a more scientific basis, because what I did was to say, these societies, these colonies we know, everyone knows the fire ants, for example, the colonies, and the colonies can be thought of as populations of individuals. That populations grow, they shrink, they have to have the members communicate with one another. So I use the principles of population biology, that is what we know of how populations are organized that are not social, to study and understand societies. And this worked very well for animals. And in 2 books published in 1971 and in 1975, I brought all that together. And in 1975, in a book called Sociobiology, The New Synthesis, I had the idea complete and was able to define it as a new discipline of study, which is defined as sociobiology, the study of the biological basis of all forms of social behavior in all kinds of animals. Now,
now when people figured out what it was you had said.
Yeah, well, I tell you, it was hailed. I mean, I got tremendous reviews for everything from ants to chimpanzees. However, in this book, I felt I couldn't be complete unless I included human beings. So I said, maybe we can apply some of these principles to human beings. And then all hell broke loose.
Yeah.
And this was, and I didn't expect it. 1975, when the book came out, it got great reviews, but it also got terrible attacks. And I'll tell you where the attacks came from. They came at that time from Marxists. Marxists, you know, the far left, were dedicated to the idea of what's called the blank slate mind. In other words, the brain, in their view, is at birth a blank slate upon which culture and experience inscribe all of the knowledge and feelings that people have.
Right.
And the reason why the Marxists were so devoted to this idea is that the part of the philosophy at that time of Marxism, which will seem very strange to people today, I have to say, was that if the mind is a blank slate, then you can fit people into any system you want, and they will adapt to it and be happy. And the idea was that, you know, all you had to do was to get a perfect state, a perfect government. And we know what the perfect government would be. Well, of course, that's communism, or as they like to say later, socialism. And that was the guiding philosophy of much of the far left at that time. Sociobiology said the exact opposite. Sociobiology said, and there was a lot of evidence favoring it even then, for humans, we're not talking animals, just humans, said that there is such a thing as human nature, that it's inborn in us, that it characterizes us. It doesn't determine exactly what we will become, but it has the power to influence what we like, how we bond, what we come to fear, how we form territories, and so on. And this has a profound impact, influence, this biological human nature, on how people behave, and also helps to explain why so much of human behavior, social behavior, is universal among all society. Well, I'll tell you in just a word, that view won out.
Yes. There's one element in it that has always attracted me as the most interesting, and that is altruism.
Right.
Altruism always seems to be the the thing that people like to talk about. Is altruism in some sense an inherited characteristic in the human species?
Yes, indeed it is.
Why?
It might seem strange, and here we are talking about Darwinian reasoning.
Yes.
Let's lay it on the table, that this human nature in the scientific view has evolved just like the human body. And if it is Darwinian, that is, if it's evolution by natural selection, then it creates a paradox. Because how can you have the best, the highest survival rate for you, yourself, and your children if you're going to help other people, you know, and give away things to other people and sacrifice your life?
Or throw yourself on the grenade?
Yes, I'll come to that.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No. Well, we thought, I'm going to tell you something brand new and revolutionary right now as you hear it for the first time here.
Okay.
Because I'm not actually releasing it. It's until an article goes off in the next few weeks to the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, and then is followed by a talk at the Society of Scientists that work on the biological basis of human behavior, essentially sociobiology. The solution to the problem 30 years ago seemed to be that altruism can arise by the gain that we have by taking care of what are called collateral relatives. In other words, what counts are the genes that make us human and make each human being distinctive. Now, some of these genes are passed obviously to your offspring, but some of these genes can be passed collaterally. In other words, you share some of those genes with a brother, a sister,
Sure.
a first cousin, and so on. So if you show altruism to them, then you may lose a little. You know, you may have one child less, you may live 5 years less, but if they gain by having more chance to live themselves and have more children, then the genes they share with you will go on and increase in the population. Right. That was the basic explanation.
And I liked it.
I know, it's lovely, isn't it?
Yes.
And in fact, I helped promote it vigorously in the 70s and was responsible in part for making it popular. Now, I'm not going to speak to human beings because we haven't studied human beings and we haven't studied most higher vertebrate animals, you know, like dogs and intelligent birds and so on. But I'm going to speak to insects, which we've now had a lot of new information on and which have extreme levels of altruism. After all, our friendly fire ants are so bad because they're throwing their lives away to drive you away from the mother nest. Okay, that's, everybody knows about that. And I'm going to tell you that it isn't because the ants are looking after kin. It is because groups are so superior to individuals under certain circumstances in nature that it doesn't matter much whether you're related to them or not. Now, let's do some wild speculation here. And that's all it is. Suppose this were true for human beings. Then it might be the case that we tend to favor that the altruism is shown to relatives more than to others. Not because showing altruism to relatives increases the chances of your genes being, your personal gene, you know, shared with them being transmitted. But may the close relationship, the relatedness they have, may be the result of the origin of altruism rather than the cause of it. In other words, if groups are superior, far superior to individuals under certain circumstances, then, and the genes brought groups, this certain unidentified genes yet brought the groups together, then you have the altruism, you have the group, and it would be just natural that these groups, when they started having children within the group, will be more closely related. Okay, now, Congressional Medal of Honor. We enormously admire and have a hard time understanding how people, men mostly, throw away their lives for what? Not for their relatives, not for their country, but for their buddies.
Their friend.
For their
Sure,
for
yes.
the squad. And I'm a student of the Congressional Medal of Honor.
Mm-hmm.
I actually worked a bit with one of America's most famous Medal of Honor winners, Jim Stockdale, who won it leading men through great ordeals in the Hanoi prison.
Mm-hmm.
And he studied the same problem. And that was one troubling circumstance, in the theory, which now seems resolved, that people will sacrifice for the groups that they are bonded to and feel that deep sense of responsibility to, and they expect same behavior from these people. Often that's the relatives, but it isn't necessary.
In the 70s, I loved, I will confess this, and I don't know what you think about it. I read Conrad Lorenz, and then I read Robert Ardrey, the trilogy by Ardrey, and I read Lionel Tiger and Robin Fox, and I just thought, there is the answer to courtship, marriage, property. And then has it all been discredited? Is the territorial imperative now just a dead idea?
No, it's confirmed.
Oh, how nice.
Most of what Conrad Lorenz said, most of what Ardrey said, and most of what Lionel Tiger and Robin Fox
Some
said
names,
is
huh?
correct. It's just, they presented it, they were a very early version. They gave a very early version of sociobiology, and it was rather crude. Conrad Lorenz just had an idea of how the mind worked and the energies and so on, which was all wrong. But the basic conclusions he drew about the role of aggression in survival of individuals and group was essentially correct, and so on.
You've discussed your own writing habits, some in different places.
Yeah.
You're a fluid writer. Apparently it comes easily to you, or at least you suggest that it does. You've won the Pulitzer Prize twice. You've written a great many pieces, long and short. Talk about your writing for a bit. Literally, you write every day, you think and then write, you write then revise. What is your system? People want to know.
I'm a Southern, inside this scientist is a Southern writer trying to get out.
Uh-huh.
Well.
Are you going to write a novel?
No.
Oh, all right then.
I've asked that question often. Why not write a novel? And I've said, I write pretty good nonfiction. Why should I write a bad novel?
Yeah.
And it's curious, isn't it, that creative writing is so strong in the South, and
Yes.
it's so well regarded. And I think that's one of the most attractive features of Southern culture, that it produces so many writers, an appreciation of the written word, of the beauty of the written word, and has produced so many writers and editors who moved on up the Atlantic seaboard and elsewhere around
The Willie
world.
Morrises of our culture.
That's right,
Yeah.
and the Howell Rainey's and
Yeah,
so
yes,
on.
yes.
And I won't try to delve too deeply into it. I have an idea of why this is true. I've discussed it with other Southern writers. But in my case, well, I don't know any other way to put it. I just had talent. It came out when I was a little kid. I just loved writing stories. I loved listening to the beauty of the words. And if you want to explain, and probably it's too simple or simplistic, one reason I loved the words was Southern Baptist sermons. I was raised a Southern Baptist, and I loved the music. Not the choir music. I mean, I loved the rhythm and the power, of a good sermon. There were other influences, but it led me then to cultivate that as I went on into a scientific career. I didn't start writing nonfiction, that is, for a broad audience,
Yes.
until I was in my 40s, and I was a fairly well-established scientist.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't occur to me to do that. But when I found, particularly in writing about sociobiology, I was forced into it really by the controversy, to write clearly for a broad audience to make sure I wasn't misunderstood. about the blank slate versus the the engraved slate. And then I discovered that this was a very important thing to do, and I've kept it up. I write almost every day. I follow the good advice of Ken Galbraith that one writes every day, even when you feel mediocre. And I've discovered that. There have been days when I felt the muse was on me and I couldn't wait to get down and write, and I write. I don't type, I don't use a computer, I use yellow line paper and ink. And I found that by the end of the day, my enthusiasm is, or the end of the morning usually for me, my enthusiasm has slacked away, and I said, gee, that's pretty poor after all. But then there have been mediocre days when I said, hard to start, just hard to start, I got to get started. And something really good came out. So my advice to young writers is write every day if you can. If you have a job, well, try to get up a little earlier if you can, if you're not too sleepy, and do some writing.
Galbraith went through drafts. He was a writer who liked to get it down on paper, then rework it, and rework it again. And in fact, there's a famous quote from Galbraith where he talks about how at the very last draft, just before he sends it to his publisher, he puts in the spontaneous humor.
The spontaneous humor.
Do you work over drafts, or do you think it through, and then when you've written it, it pretty well stays written?
No, I work through typically 3 drafts, and if it's very important or difficult, I go as far as 4, 5, 6. The first chapter of my book, Biophilia, which was my first authentically literary effort, with an intention to write poetic prose, went through 20 drafts. But that's very unusual. Normally I put 3 drafts into a scientific paper and maybe 5 to 10 in a paper with literary ambitions.
Wow. Well, this has been even more enlightening and more fun than I knew that it would be. Thank you very much. You've been very generous.
And thank you so much for letting me speak to a home audience.